and business leader from Santa Barbara. His most recent book, Meeting Mozart from the Secret Diaries of Lorenzo da Ponte. Do you pronounce the last E? Da Ponte?
Da Ponte.
Ponte, okay, is his fourth book. His other books include a book about Beethoven in Love, Opus 139, Opening the Doors to Hollywood, and John Gardner, An Interview. He was recently awarded a Profont Foundation for the Arts Literature Division Scholarship, and he is a former Breadloaf Scholar and Washington, D.C. Commission for the Arts Fellow. Those are very long names. And he taught for many years at UCLA's Extension Writers Program and has lectured nationally. His articles, short stories, and photographs have appeared in the Washington Post, the Beethoven Journal, Horizon, the Journal of the Writers Guild of America, Ojai Quarterly, and numerous trade publications. While an executive at ABC Television, Embassy TV, and Academy Home Entertainment, he worked on numerous film, television, radio, and commercial projects. Currently, he serves on the board of directors of the Santa Barbara Symphony and is a member of the American Beethoven Society. He helped initiate the planned Giving Advisory Council at Channel City University. Oh, wait a minute. California State University at Channel Islands, is that right?
That's correct, thank you. Yeah.
Where he chaired their annual Breakfast with the Federal Reserve program. Formerly, he served 3 years as chairman of the board of the Ventura County Economic Development Association. During his many decades of community service, Howard Smith has been awarded certificates of special congressional recognition by Representative Elton Gallegly and Lois Capps, as well as by the Ventura County Board of Supervisors, the California State Senate, and the California State Assembly. Howard J. Smith has been recognized as Business Executive of the Year by the Ventura County Leadership Academy, as Small Business Advocate of the Year by the same group, Santa Barbara Association, and as a top regional business leader 3 separate years by the Pacific Coast Business Times. He previously represented the city of Ojai on the board of the county's Economic Development Collaborative and the Ventura County Film Council. He's past president of the Ojai Valley Chamber of Commerce and served 3 years as secretary of the Ojai West Rotary and 3 years on the board of the World Business Association. Howard J. Smith was one of the founders of the Ojai Film Festival, and in 2005, he organized and curated one of the most successful exhibits ever at the Ventura County Maritime Museum. That was called When China Ruled the Seas, the Treasure Fleets of the Ming Dynasty. We're so delighted to have you with us today, Howard, and the mic is yours.
Thank you, appreciate it very much. The Yacht Club, Santa Barbara Yacht Club, is one of my favorite places to do talks. This is actually, I think, my third. I've done a Beethoven talk there, and I also did one on those Chinese treasure fleets. One of the reasons I love it so much is, as you can see from this picture, this is taken from the deck of the Yacht Club. You have dolphins playing right outside when you're dining. This was Mother's Day a few years ago. It's always a fun place to give a talk, and you never know what you're going to see. I think when I was giving my last talk there actually was a whale swimming by that you could see from the speaker's lectern. So again, you never know what's going to happen here. Anyway, as she mentioned, my book, Meeting Mozart, a novel drawn from the secret diaries of Lorenzo da Ponte, just came out this past month. It's a story that takes place on 2 different levels. It's a multi-generational saga, both about da Ponte and Mozart. Da Ponte was Mozart's librettist, and also his present-day descendants beginning around the end of World War II when the secret diaries, which we'll talk about later, are actually discovered. The novel's been off to a great start. I've gotten some fabulous reviews by professional writers and journalists. One called it the musical equivalent of the Da Vinci Code, and the other, Jan Swafford, who is the leading biographer of Mozart, Beethoven, and Brahms, just sort of delighted in the book. So I was really pleased with those to get it launched, and I'm actually delighted here to talk. But before I get into a discussion about Da Ponte and Mozart, I want you to hear and see what we're actually talking about. This is a short clip, about 4 minutes in length, taken from a film version of Don Giovanni from 1970s. It gives you a sense of the comedy and drama that takes place. The scene we're about to watch is also known as the catalog song, and the catalog of what you'll understand in a moment. And here we have one of Don Giovanni's lovers, Donna Elvira, dressed in white, speaking with Don Giovanni's servant, Leporello. And Leporello is trying to get across to Donna Elvira that Don Giovanni is, and she are, well, I'm sorry, let me rephrase that, that she is not the only woman that Don Giovanni has been interested in. So take a listen, and then after we'll start the actual talk after this little clip.
Catalogo è questo, delle belle che amo il padron mio, un catalogo che ho patito. Osservate, leggete con me, osservate, leggete con me. In Italia 640, in Albania 231, 100 in Francia e Turchia 90, mai in Spagna soltanto 1.300, 1.300. Ma fra questi contadine, cameriere cittadine, al contesse baronesse, marchesine del principesse che van d'ogni grado, d'ogni forma, d'ogni età, d'ogni discorso, d'ogni età. Italia 640, in Albania 231, 100 in Francia, in Turchia 91, ma in Spagna sono 1.300, 1.300. Ma fra questi contadini, cameriere, cittadine, ma contesse, baronesse, marchesine, principesse, che vanno d'ogni grado, d'ogni forma, d'ogni età, ogni forma, ogni età, ogni forma, ogni età. sua passion predominante la giovine principiante non si dica se sia ricca, se sia dolce, se sia bella, se sia ricca, brutta, se sia bella. Sapete quel che fa, voi sapete quel che fa, pur che porti l'angiola, voi sapete voi sapete quel che fa.
Okay, so you get a flavor of what Mozart, who wrote the music, and De Ponte, who wrote the words, were doing in their operas. Now, De Ponte was nicknamed by people behind his back as Mozart's Jewish priest. For in fact, he was both Jewish and he had become a Catholic priest. How we got there, that's the story of what we're going to tell today. And the underlying theme of the book is how does a Jew survive in an essentially hostile world? So De Ponte collaborated on three of the greatest operas of all time. These are operas that are still performed pretty much somewhere around the world every day. Even during COVID, you can still find productions of all three of these. And what do they write about? Rape, murder, infidelity, eternal damnation, kidnapping, births out of wedlock, gambling, secret identity, and war between the classes. And again, those were just their comedies. So the first one they produced was The Marriage of Figaro in 1786, quickly followed a year later by Don Giovanni, 1787, which you just saw. And then, oh, there's a whale again coming outside the yacht club. Again, you never know what you're going to see here on any given day. The next one, the third one that they did, their final together, was Così fan tutte, or The School for Lovers. That was in 1790. Now, De Ponte was actually born Emanuele Conegliano, March 10th, 1749. I always like that because he's almost exactly within a year, 200 years older than I am. He's born in Cineta, a small town pushed up against the mountains just outside Venice, an area called the Veneto. He's born, obviously, in the Jewish ghetto of Cineta. Here's a picture of that from around 1900. And this would have been the gates. Ghetto gates were locked at night. Jews were not allowed to be out at night in the rest of the town. And he probably grew up on a street, Giudecca. You actually will find all over Italy streets called Via Giudecca, which is Street of the Jews. However, other than tourists, thanks to the Holocaust and World War II, you will almost never encounter a Jewish community any longer anywhere in Italy. Most were killed or wiped out during the Holocaust or fled afterwards. Now, Emanuele, as he was known at that age, was actually a brilliant prodigy. Just like everyone considered Mozart this absolute genius, which he was, so was De Ponte. He received no formal education, however. He was an unschooled genius, other than learning Hebrew from his rabbi for his bar mitzvah. His widow's father was too poor to pay for Emanuele's education, so he was essentially unschooled. His father, however, was a leather worker in the ghetto. He made saddles, all kinds of other accoutrements, and so forth. But the most important thing he did as a leather worker was bind books. And these, De Ponte, as a young boy, would sneak up to the attic before they were delivered to whoever had commissioned it, and he would read the books. And he sort of became self-educated, self-taught. And the most important of these books, one that will ultimately connect him to Mozart was the works of Pietro Metastasio. And Metastasio was in the 1700s, the most important Italian poet of that era. And for 50 years, he was also the leading librettist, or the man who wrote operas for the Habsburg court in Vienna. He was famous throughout the world at that point, the known world, so to speak, European world. And it's later that which, as I said, will connect him to Mozart. Now, his father was a widower. De Ponte's mother died at the birth of his youngest brother. He had two other brothers at this point. And his father wanted to marry a young Catholic woman who was only 4 years older than Emanuele. And so to do that, his father had to convert the entire family to Catholicism. And to do that meant leaving the ghetto behind forever, instantly. So in one day, he's a Jew. The next day, he's Catholic. They're forced out of the ghetto. He no longer gets to see any of his friends who he grew up with, including his girlfriends, and he had many at that age, healthy young male. And so he went into this other state of being a converso. Now, conversos were forbidden by law, and you have to remember at that point, the church and the secular authorities overlapped probably 80% in terms of how they ran towns and cities. Conversos were forbidden by law to have contact with any other Jews. Violators could be sentenced to the whip, the pillory, prison, life as a galley slave, or hanging by rope until dead. The church was terrified of people backsliding or being what they call crypto Jews, meaning secret Jews. So in 1763, at the age of 14, a year after his bar mitzvah, Emanuele Corneliano becomes Lorenzo de Ponte. De Ponte was the name of the bishop that converted them, who did the conversion ceremony. Whole family became de Pontes, and he took the first name of the bishop, which was also Lorenzo. He was a smart cookie because he also convinced the bishop to pay for him to go to school. Unfortunately, the ultimate destination of going to the seminary was to become a priest, a calling which he admitted throughout his diaries was certainly against his true nature, but he becomes a priest. And his first assignment is Venice. And this brings us to part one of the novel, which is set in Venice, both in the modern era and in 1771. The drawings here are actually done by Zach Smith, my son, who is an artist whose work fortunately hangs in 9 museums around the world. And I convinced him to do the artwork for this book. And again, this is part 1, Venice. And Venice, at the time when de Ponte arrived, was in the middle of Carnival. Carnival lasted for months on end, much longer than it does now. And in fact, people in the Veneto wore masks and capes pretty much year round. It was part of the allure of being in Venice that you could always hide your identity and do anything. And in spite of being a priest, de Ponte never let his clerical collar stand in the way of having a good affair. On Sundays, the Abbe de Ponte would conduct mass in the Church of St. Luke in Venice, which is still there to this day. Here's the interior, very beautiful building. But afterwards, he returned to the arms of his primary mistress, Angela Tiepolo. Tiepolo was a very famous family in Venice. In fact, her family owned one of the most famous opera houses, Teatro San Benedetto. Now, Angela was also married at that point, which compelled de Ponte to pretend he was merely her priestly escort when they went out. And again, another drawing from the book by Zach, and here they are dressed in costumes, heading out for a night on the town. Where would they go? Mostly they went to the Ridotto gambling hall, and they loved to gamble, play cards, party. And if you notice, the people who worked in the gambling halls did not wear masks, but everyone who attended did. So identities were unknown. People gambled and wore these masks year round, coming and going. Venice at that point was basically the Las Vegas of Europe. It was the place where the secret stayed behind your mask and your cape. Gambling fortunes were won and lost, mostly lost. But in Venice, the parties never stopped. The gambling went on constantly. Unfortunately, along the way, de Ponte and Angela had 2 children. Both were given up for adoption and delivered to this church, the Santa Maria della Pieta, which was actually very famous for having been the home of Vivaldi 50 years earlier. And Vivaldi used to teach the young women of that foundling center to play in orchestras and conduct music there. Now, also in Venice in 1771, this young man showed up, Mozart. Mozart arrived there just before his birthday, which was January 27th, 1771. But a little bit about Mozart. First, he was born in Salzburg in Austria, not all that far from Vienna. He's born 1756. He's 7 years younger than De Ponte. Here he is, January 25th. And he wrote his first compositions at age 5. Mozart was an absolute genius, wonderkind. As a young boy, he toured Europe with his sister and his father. His sister was actually a pianist. His father was a skilled violinist, violist, and teacher. Their first tour began visiting the Empress Maria Theresa in Vienna. From there, they would travel throughout Paris, London. He stayed in London for about 1.5 years, where he studied with Bach's sons. And by 1771, by the time he arrives in Venice, he is actually a very sophisticated 15-year-old young man. He'd already written 4 operas and was hard at work on his 5th. He had just come from Milan, where he had completed an opera. And he stops in Venice. Again, it's Carnival, and this is what you'd be seeing. Now, he may have met De Ponte at that point. History will never tell us, although in the novel, this is their first incidental meeting. They don't even, because they're behind masks, they don't actually know who the other one is. And this is the Teatro San Benedetto, where at that time was playing an opera by Piero Metastasio, the same poet who they both admired. That opera might well have been La Clemenza di Tito or The Mercy of Titus, which played at the Met last year, just before the shutdown. And this version was composed by Christoph Gluck. The version at the Met was actually done by Mozart, and it was the last opera he actually ever wrote in his life. So they may have well met that night. And De Ponte at the time would have been perhaps in his priestly garb or somewhere else. And this is a scene from the book where the Teatro San Benedetto did in fact burn down. You have to remember, these are wooden structures lit by candles throughout. And it did burn down, and here he is escaping from those flames by jumping into the Grand Canal of Venice. And though they probably did not meet, this is what they both experienced for the first time, and it's images that stayed with them for a lifetime. Here we are in Carnival, parties, gambling, masks, costumes, loose morals, secret identities, dangerous relations, and it was dangerous. This is again from the book. It is the killing of the commendatore, the real killing, not the one in the opera. Murders were commonplace. And Mozart was equally at home with the vices of Venice. These trademarks will definitely be major focuses of all 3 of their operas. Mozart, however, returns to Salzburg to continue composing, and De Ponte remains in Venice for the next 10 years of his life. First part, he is a priest. He also gets work writing and doing letters, poems, stories. And while he's there, he meets the infamous Casanova. Casanova, a real person, was a generation older than De Ponte, and he becomes not only a mentor, but a role model of how to behave and how to be licentious. And he also is the ultimate inspiration for Don Giovanni, which we heard a clip of earlier. Casanova's diaries, usually I would hold these up and show you, there are 1,000 pages of 6-point font, really small print, and they don't even cover the period after he meets De Ponte, simply before. It's an incredible diary of his journeys throughout Europe, bedding as many women as you saw in the catalog song earlier. Now, De Ponte, though he tells no one he's a Jew, it's basically known, and he's reviled for being a Jew, and also because he's frequently sleeping with married women. And he is denounced for doing this. And in Venice, if you wanted to denounce somebody, there are these lions, sort of these open-mouthed lion statues all over the city, where you can write a note, put it in the lion's mouth, and it's collected by the courts and the Inquisition. And he was, in fact, denounced and had